Welcome to Part 2 of the TPA overview presentation. Again, you will need the following documents handy for this section of the presentation: the field test handbook for your content area, and templates for each TPA task in your content area. Part 1 of the TPA overview addressed the national and CU contexts for adopting the TPA and gave you a big picture view of the TPA's lineage and key design elements. Part 2 introduces you to the organization of the field test handbook, templates, and rubrics. And during this second part, you will take a guided walk through the structure of each TPA task and its rubrics. You'll be pausing throughout this presentation to read and annotate your field test handbook. And finally, the TPA as an assessment tool pays close attention to how candidates demonstrate their ability to help learners develop academic language. So we'll look at how this idea is framed across the tasks, rubrics, and glossary. First, let's take a look at the basic organization of the field test handbook. It's packed with resources. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the Elementary Literacy Field Test Handbook as an exemplar and referring to specific pages, which should be exact or very close for other content area handbooks. The table of contents is found on page 1. Pause this presentation and take a moment to scan the major headings and note the similar subheadings for tasks 1 through 4. Page 3 summarizes the handbook structure. As a reminder, the TPA documents a learning segment, which is 3 to 5 hours or lessons of connected instruction, and there are 4 tasks that comprise the TPA. Each task has 4 sections: what to think about, what do I need to do, what do I need to write, how will the evidence of my teaching practice be assessed. Student teachers need to read the handbook entirely and carefully before beginning the learning segment, so they understand what artifacts to put together and what commentary prompts to answer within each task. Pages 4 to 6 provide assessment components at a glance for each of the 4 TPA tasks. These are helpful advanced organizers that summarize what to do, what to submit, and which rubrics are central in the assessment of each task. You'll find you frequently refer back to these. The 12 rubrics for the TPA are found after the glossary section in the handbook. Each rubric has a similar structure, and I'll describe some key features of the structure using rubric 9 as an example. First, each rubric has a focus and an essential question. For rubric 9, the focus is analyzing teacher effectiveness, and the essential question is found in the brown box. For this rubric, it's how does the candidate use evidence to evaluate and change teaching practice to meet the varied learning needs? Each rubric specifies performance levels running from 1 to 5. The levels characterize a progression from early novice to accomplished teacher. Let me provide a way to think about the levels. Level 1 is not ready to teach. Level 3 is ready to teach with induction level support, and this is what most of our candidates should and will achieve on nearly all rubrics of the TPA. Levels 4 and 5 describe practices of a veteran to a master teacher. And I've heard some people describe level 5 as a room where no one lives. That is, even masterful veteran teachers do not live at 5 every lesson in every day. But veteran teachers live at level 4 and make regular visits to level 5. So on most days, a veteran teacher would demonstrate a level 4 performance and in some categories, a level 5. The really big point to stress for student teachers is that they are not likely to score a 4 or 5. And this is a little bit of a paradigm shift for them when they look at a rubric. The vast majority will demonstrate level 3 performances, and there may even be some level 2 performances. You'll also notice as you read the descriptions of the performance from a level 1 to a level 5 on each of the indicators, and on this particular rubric there are 2 indicators. You'll see how those rubrics are both additive and analytical, and how they show a progression of performance and what changes from one level to the next. So for example, the analysis of teaching tasks asks the candidates to think about one thing that they would change if they were going to reteach the lessons to the same group of students to improve student learning. And you'll see that a level 1 on that first indicator is not ready to teach because the changes that are proposed don't relate to the students and their learning. Level 2 proposes changes around time management and directions, etc., that address more technical features of teaching. And then if you read level 3s, 4, and 5, you'll begin to see how at 3, the teacher has shifted to the students, but at a collective learning level,
and that at levels 4 and 5, the teacher is engaging in more nuanced thinking about each of the students in the class. So you'll notice that the performance levels, as they are both additive and analytical, show a progression from a teacher focus to a student focus, and that student focus moves from a focus on whole class to a generic group of individuals. So to summarize, as you look at the other 11 rubrics in the TPA, you'll see these same key features of the rubric. You'll notice a focus, an essential question, and performance levels that tease out an analytical progression that moves candidates towards more sophisticated practice and that shifts from a focus on the teacher to a focus on individual students. And I'll notice for all of us in the teacher ed programs that we can and will take up in discussion substantively what's being asked in the rubrics. And we'll ask ourselves whether or not these rubrics leave sufficient room for candidates to display the kinds of understandings that we really care about and cultivate, including a critical stance toward teaching and learning. The glossary of terms is hyperlinked throughout the document and explains key terms such as academic language, or central focus of a learning segment, etc. And many of the glossary terms describe or explain features of academic language, so it's a very helpful resource. The final pages of the handbook provide tables that summarize both what to submit for each task and the specifications for file format, naming protocols, length, and text formatting. For example, all of the documents for the TPA need to be done in Arial 11 font. These standardized specifications are important to our candidates to learn and practice as they ensure an efficient functional upload of the TPA tasks to the Pearson platform. And I'll note that overall the TPA is 25 pages of single-spaced pages of commentary, and those pages include the commentary prompts. In addition, they also upload supporting artifacts such as lesson plans, video clips, and student work. This slide shows part of a template. Templates are Word documents student teachers download, write onto, save, and upload to submit. Each has the same structure. And we'll use Task 2B's instruction commentary as an example. The brown box provides specific instructions about how to use the template, text formatting instructions, page length, and file format instructions. The bold numbered items are the specific prompts student teachers respond to that are also found in the What to Write section of the handbook. The red shows where student teachers insert their text. And while the TPA results in 25 pages of written text, the genre is not a research project or an extended essay. The writing task is to provide focused, incisive responses to prompts that do indeed press for analysis and reflection on teaching practice. Now that you have a sense of the handbook structure and resources, we'll take some time working through each task. In this guided walk through each task, you'll find suggested steps and questions to consider in the slides ahead. As we move through each task, I've tried posing questions that get you to think about what student teachers may find easy or hard, or how this task might relate to your course assignments. These are not the only questions worth asking, but they do help you take a first close look at the TPA, especially the specifics of the tasks. I've organized the guided tour through each task in exactly the same way. You'll start by looking at what does the task ask students to think about and what does it ask them to do. And next you'll turn to the rubrics associated with the task, paying close attention to the analytic criteria and what distinguishes levels of performance, especially a 2, 3, and a 4 level of performance. Then you'll go back to the task directions and analyze each of the commentary prompts that students write to. And finally, you'll look at how candidates show their understanding of academic language in each task, as academic language is not a separate task, but rather attention to it is embedded in all of the tasks. We'll start with Task 1, which focuses on planning for instruction and assessment. Read the What to Think About section, circling and highlighting what you see as the aim of the task, and then ask yourself whether the way this planning task is framed resonates with your ideas about good teaching practice and or how you talk about planning in your course. You'll probably want to pause the presentation to read and think, and then move on. The What to Do section outlines steps candidates take to complete the planning for instruction and assessment task. The questions on this slide move you through the different to-do steps and point you toward related documents, templates, for example, templates, glossary terms, etc. And again, I suggest you pause the presentation to work through the checkboxes and the What to Do section of Task 1. Now, put a marker on pages 4 to 6 in your handbook. Those are the assessment components at a glance. And then flip to the rubrics part of the handbook near the end. There are 5 rubrics used to assess the planning task. Rubrics 1 to 3 focus directly on the intellectual work of planning, and rubrics 10 and 11 address academic language, focusing on how the candidate has taken into account the language abilities of his or her students and the language demands of the task during the planning phase. The steps on these slides guide you through a close read of the rubrics, paying particular attention to the differences among performance levels, especially levels 2, 3, and 4. You may again want to pause to do this work and look closely at the rubrics. Now, put a marker on pages 4 to 6 in your handbook. Those are the assessment components at a glance, and then flip to the rubrics part of the handbook near the end. There are 5 rubrics used to assess the planning task. Rubrics 1 to 3 focus directly on the intellectual work of planning, and rubrics 10 and 11 address academic language, focusing on how the candidate has taken into account the language abilities of his or her students and the language demands of the task during the planning phase. The steps on these slides guide you through a close read of the rubrics, paying particular attention to the differences among performance levels, especially levels 2, 3, and 4. You may again want to pause to do this work and look closely at the rubrics. Now flip back to the What Do I Need to Write section of Task 1 in the Field Test Handbook. The steps and questions on this slide guide you to read with care what candidates are asked to write in their planning commentary. Now we're on to Task 2, Instructing and Engaging Students in Learning, and you'll begin to see a familiar pattern to the steps and questions. And I'll stop providing reminders to pause after each slide. What's important to pay attention in Task 2 is how the student teacher's curricular and instructional decisions made while planning the learning segment must take into account what kind of instructional activities they will video for Task 2. So a question is, how well have they planned activities that meaningfully engage students in learning and that are appropriate for the rubrics in Task 2? It's helpful to read the entire What Do I Need to Do section of Task 2 and then ponder the questions on the slide. Try to avoid getting tangled up on the logistics of video recording, as we're going to try and offer technology workshops that support candidates in this. And we found, while difficult, it has not been a major problem for candidates during the pilot phases of the TPA. Now turn to the rubrics for Task 2, and you'll note I'm repeating questions to guide you through a close read of those rubrics. Turn back to the What Do I Write section for Task 2 in the handbook, and you'll see the 3 steps on the slide are similar to those you followed to examine the What to Write prompts in Task 1.
Task 3 focuses on assessing student learning, including how candidates monitor learning during instruction, examine student work, and provide feedback to students. The TPA's approach to assessment is markedly different than the pre-post analyses of student learning completed in our teacher work sample. It's our sense, based on our pilot work, that candidates find these analyses of student learning provokes much deeper reflection than the teacher work sample pre-post analyses did. To do well on this task, student teachers do have to be able to articulate criteria they are using to assess student learning. Then that may take the form of a rubric. Here are some questions to guide you through the specific tasks candidates complete as part of the assessment task. Take some time to review the rubrics for Task 3. Now review carefully the What Do I Need to Write section of Task 3's guidelines to understand the assessment commentary. Task 4 asks candidates to analyze and reflect upon relationships between their teaching in the learning segment and student learning. Candidates do not submit daily reflection notes with their TPA, but they do need to maintain daily notes in order to complete this task. Look closely at the rubric for Task 4. And now consider the prompts candidates respond to in their analyzing teaching commentary. Evidence for academic language is gathered across tasks. As you look at how academic language is framed, you'll see an emphasis on vocabulary, function, form, and instructional language. You may find you want to review the webinars on the TPAC-NING that talk about academic language in more detail. I anticipate that after we've looked at some actual TPAs, we'll be more ready to talk about how the TPA frames academic language and how this framing builds on and/or departs from how we address academic language in our courses. This brings us to the conclusion of the second part of the overview to the TPA. Hopefully by now you find you have developed an understanding of the topics listed on this slide, and you feel ready to take the following steps. Here's some more suggested immediate next steps, and looking forward to continuing to learn with and from one another about the TPA.